Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver, founder of the law office Eric M. Sarver, and also a business and employment law attorney. I'm here every Tuesday night from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. When I say here, I'm referencing, of course, talkradio.nyc. And I'm here tonight with a special guest of mine, Miss Simone Sloan, founder of Your Choice Coach. Simone, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you as well. I'm definitely going to introduce you in a more formal way so our audience can understand who you are and what you do and how you can help them. But I thought first I would address some of the main goals of the show of Employment Law Today. For those that might be new listeners or people coming back to the show to listen, the purpose and focus of Employment Law Today is to help small and mid-sized business owners and employers to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic, mainly to go through and address some of the employment law, labor law, and HR issues that come up, especially during the COVID-19, not only the situation itself, but also in companies responding through policies and what the law requires you to do and so forth. So in this vein, I usually have guests such as Simone Sloan, who can talk about these very pertinent issues. And I would like to just introduce Simone in a more formal way. Simone and I are friends and colleagues. I'm very pleased to have her on the show. And I've had the pleasure of having Simone speak at a networking event that I run, and it's a fabulous presentation. So Simone, I'll just kind of sing your praises here, if I may. Simone Sloan, RPH MBA, her mantra is voice, power, and confidence. She is the founder of Your Choice Coach, an emotional intelligence business coach, an executive business coach, and a diversity and inclusion consultant. Simone changes the way businesses engage their employees and clients to create value. She emphasizes the human element with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's an active member of the Tri-State Diversity Council and an advocate for women professionals and entrepreneurs. Simone's background includes experience in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, where she successfully launched and led products and services, implemented programs for stakeholders across the globe, and developed and trained sales, medical, and technical teams. Simone holds a BS in pharmacy and an MBA from Howard University. She is co-author of the book Achieving Results, is Emotional Intelligence EQI 2.0 certified, and DISC certified as well. It's DISC, as well as IDI certified, blockchain certified, and accredited via the International Coaching Federation. Simone, if I left anything out, please feel free at the end in the wrap up to add it
I
in
think that's a
there. But
mouthful, but thank you. Thank you very much
sure
for
thing. A
having
little
me
bit of a
here.
tongue twister. My pleasure. A few tongue twisters. I think I got them in though. But if I could just introduce our topic for tonight, folks, is conceding COVID's toll on women and people of color in the workforce. And I think Simone and I were talking, and few people would question that COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on our country from a perspective of physical health, emotional well-being, and economic perspective. And while some of the harmful economic impact on business is very obvious, it's direct, losses in revenues, required shutdowns, and so forth, there's another toll that may not be as obvious to some employers. And that toll has to do with their female employees and their employees of color who are losing their positions and their career tracks. Many are being sidelined by the disparate and disproportionate impact of the employer policies. A lot of these policies are in response to COVID-19, some even with a neutral or maybe even a well-intentioned motivation to address the pandemic. So on tonight's show, I'll be speaking with Simone Sloan, and we'll be discussing and examining how employers' responses to the pandemic have had a disparate impact on employees of color and women in the workforce. How has this come about? What issues must employers be aware of? And why is it so crucial for business owners not only to have awareness, but to take action to address these issues, to remedy problematic policies that tend to marginalize workers of color and female employees and women of color in particular? So that's our topic for tonight. And Simone, if I just wanted to give you a chance, if you can tell listeners a bit more about your work in the field of diversity and inclusion.
Sure. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So, as from Your Choice Coach, we focus on the executive coaching piece through emotional intelligence. And that's one of the key foundational elements for what we do, even within the diversity, equity, inclusion consulting space. We are able to, we do training work as well as helping companies with a strategy around diversity, equity, inclusion so that they provide more sustainable structures for their organization and to be more competitive and just for thriving, right? And so within that piece, that's where a lot of the inclusive leadership coaching comes into play, emotional intelligence comes into play,
Mm.
and for that to provide as other tools, if you will, to support organizations. And we end up working with a variety of industries, from the financial services to technology to engineering, architecting firms, and to really help them at various gradients within their strategies around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
It's interesting. I'm hearing a lot from all my guests around emotional intelligence, around implicit bias, around inclusiveness, and just really addressing these points, which, as I've always stated on the show, Simone, I know you and I have had this conversation before when we've spoken about doing workshops and speaking engagements right before COVID hit,
Right.
that these are issues that have always been important to businesses. It's always been an issue, and it's of benefit to a business from a legal perspective, from a productivity perspective, from a public relations perspective, just to have those strategies in place to obtain and address those goals that you mentioned. So I'm really glad that we're here talking about this tonight. And I've also noticed that these issues tend to really come up a lot during the pandemic. It seems like the COVID-19 pandemic throws sort of gasoline on whatever small fires, right, might be burning within a company.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you another sort of follow-up question from there, Simone, just based on your experience, can you tell us in what ways specifically has the pandemic affected rates of implicit bias and discrimination in the workplace?
Got it. I think when you look at it from the perspective of during COVID, you
Mhm.
kind of touch a little bit too in terms of the pre-COVID situations and what existed, right? And how COVID kind of amplified a lot of the breakdowns or disparities across various groups. When you look at it from even from a global perspective, when COVID hit, for example, and it was a socio-economic piece, because even the policies that were placed for the overall society in terms of locking down never took into consideration, well, what happens if I don't have transportation? I have to walk miles to get from one destination to another. And then what does that really mean? If you look across industries too, in terms of which ones had essential workers and had to show up
Mm.
in this condition, knowing that one, may not have had PPE, protective equipment, right? Or they had to be on a work floor where they may have had active cases but weren't being addressed. The fact that they were being probably scared to show up because of health reasons, right? Because of pre-existing known or unknown conditions.
Mhm.
Then take into consideration parents, those of us who have children, and what that meant, because what happened too is that we kind of slipped into, if that were the case, gender roles in terms of who's in charge of educating, caregiving, right? And it puts an additional strain and burden on just doing your job and being in the workplace actively engaged. So I think those are some of the things that were highlighted during COVID that existed, but may not have been amplified as part of that process. But when you look at it from the perspective of women in the workplace in terms of biases, just look in terms of the pipeline around leadership and who are in leadership, right? From that perspective. And then thinking about, secondly, not only who's missing, but even from those who are even in the business sector, meaning wanting to start a business. And
Mhm.
women, we tend to go into maybe the services industries or industries where not have high revenue driven industries. And that also places another strain and burden within for during COVID, right? So those are some things to kind of think about when you're looking at it from the biases that might have been in place in terms of policies that were put in place also.
I agree with you that these biases have existed before COVID, as you pointed out, Simone. And I do tend to see and observe that they are, in fact, multiplied and magnified by this pandemic. I mean, you talked about women and sort of assuming, stepping into certain gender roles, uh, especially as parents. And that's something I've noticed with my clients as well. I counsel business owners all the time on how to comply with the labor and employment laws. And it's interesting because many come to me and when I talk about the compliance part, how to be proactive, how to follow the different laws around discrimination, many of them think that discrimination in employment only looks very covert, as if it's outward, explicit, very direct sexual harassment or hostile work environment, or you know, hardly racist comments, or specifically firing people and stating it's because of a certain protected class. And what I've seen and what my clients have often been surprised at, maybe your clients as well, is that a lot of the policies they have to look at have to do with questions of, are there policies disparately or disproportionately impacting a certain group, like women and or people of color. And I think that's something that employers often don't recognize. A policy can be neutral on its face, but then when you put it into real time, into practice, it has a worse effect on women disproportionately than men. And so that could be against the law. It could be in violation of certain federal laws against discrimination. So I'm glad you brought that up, from a perspective of what you've seen as a diversity and inclusion specialist. I know that, we talk about how parents are now with their children and sometimes they're home and kids are being homeschooled. So that, of course, takes away, right, from women's opportunities or abilities to perform maybe certain aspects of their job, perhaps. I wondered, can you maybe also talk about, have you seen any examples that have to do with, say, the virtual work from home model that we've all become so accustomed to?
Yes, we're operating in a new circumstance, right? And, I think what some of the things have been bubbling up, and I think McKinsey did a study actually that looked at a 6-year study for women in the workplace, and especially now during COVID. And so when you think about some of the issues that have been bubbling up, is one of which is that there's this huge pressure to work more, right? Because you're at home, we're not being seen. So there's this innate need for us to prove that we are being productive. And as a result of that, what happens is that you get burnout, right? As part of that piece, people are getting exhausted. And so when you're looking at it, okay, I need to take a mental break. I need to take some kind of a break. And even anecdotally, speaking to some of the women in the workplace where their employers are giving them, issues around taking a sick day or using PTO. And so, especially during this time when if people are asking and they need time and a break, it should be important to be able to relax that and give people the space that they need to kind of thrive and to operate. So looking at it from that sustainability piece, I think it becomes very important as part of that process. Yeah.
That, I think right there, to me, that has an overlap with not only diversity and inclusion and disparate impact, but also has to do with emotional intelligence, a point that you brought up that I know you work on with your clients. We are at a commercial break, so we'll be back in a bit. Simone, we're going to pick up this conversation. I'm loving the fact that you're on the show tonight. Folks, you're listening to Employment Law Today. I'm Eric Sarver, host of the show on Talk Radio NYC. I'm here with my guest, Simone Sloan, founder of Your Choice Coaching. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Graham Dobbin. Join me every Thursday evening for the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. We speak to people from business, sport, military and politics, all around what makes a great leader. The personal experiences of what's worked and, maybe more importantly, what hasn't worked. So that's 7 o'clock every Thursday evening, the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. Listen to real stories of real leaders.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver, employment law, business law attorney at the law office, Eric M. Sarver, and I'm here tonight with my guest, Simone Sloan of Your Choice Coach. Simone, you really covered some great things before the commercial there. Just wanted to highlight a few points that popped for me. The idea, the fact that there's this pressure from employers to employees, and even from employees to think within themselves, and for everyone sort of overworked during this time. And I think you mentioned a lot of that has to do with the boundaries being blurred, the fact that we used to go to an office and then you got to train home. And when you were home, it was sort of like a separate space. And now more and more people are living, working, and teaching their children all from their living room or their bedroom or their makeshift office. You talked about the pressure to work and how with how that might disparately impact, let's say, women and especially women who are parents, as well as the idea that women and women of color might tend to go into certain fields, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of when they open their own business, maybe service oriented. I just wanted to, you talk about also the emotional intelligence part of this. So it leads me to an interesting question that I was thinking about before our show tonight. Are there emotional, psychological factors at play that you see that might be blinding some business owners to the fact that their COVID-19 policies have a discriminatory impact on women and then women, people of color for that matter?
Got it. Sure. It's interesting because when you think about it from a perspective of one component of emotional intelligence is empathy, right? And it's needed more than ever as part of that. And being able to look through that lens when you're looking at and identifying what's diversity, what's inclusion, what's equity. And I say that because when you think about it from the employer's perspective, COVID has put a lot of strain, right, on businesses in many different ways and have stretched them astronomically. And so when you're thinking about from a perspective of a business owner or even in corporations, they might just be having, we just need to survive mentality. And if you're thinking about only surviving, then you're in that kind of scarcity mode where it becomes very transactional. And as a result of that, then your people, then where you may have thought more broadly about them and holistically about them, it becomes very narrow scoped and myopic in terms of your relationship with them. But now more than ever, this is where we need to have more open dialogue and communications about how people are feeling. And does it feel like a safe environment where people can speak up and really share what's going on? I've heard where there are some women, I've spoken this anecdotally, of course, but in terms of wanting to scale back in their roles because it's too much, it's too stressful. Not only the burden of doing the work, but then they also now have realized they have a toxic manager added onto that work, and they're now responsible for their children and their education, right? And if you're working 2 or 3 jobs pre-COVID, and now that's somewhat, you're trying to figure out your living arrangements and what that means for you and your family, that's another added strain. And so I think more than ever, we need to think holistically of people in the roles that which they're doing and how best to support. And that's where the emotional intelligence piece comes into play.
Interesting to talk about empathy. And I know that often when people are in times of intense stress, as you mentioned, Simone, they go into that scarcity thinking mode, when in fact, paradoxically, thinking about, and from an abundant mindset, thinking about abundance and having sort of faith in whatever you have faith in the universe, I think it actually ends up being not only better for them, but for their employees as well.
Absolutely.
Because scarcity-based is fear-based, and fear-based, it's hard to see anyone else's perspective or perhaps they're suffering if you're focused on, oh my God, I'm going to lose the business. And
absolutely. Because
yeah,
then you're still putting the same paradigms in around performance reviews, for example, and not considering pre-COVID what performance reviews looks like in terms of the expectations, but how we shifted or have the thought of mind to really shift what that would look like from a reprioritization and working with your teams and people to determine, well, what does a new success look like and how should we be rewarded or not as part of that dialogue and conversation. But if it's only being looked at as a pre-COVID situation, then it's already, you have lots of breakdowns that end up in work there. And if people are considering stepping out of their role, then think about too, from a diverse perspective, diversity of thought, resiliency that was built in that's now gone. And that's what you really need now in order to thrive and to continue, right? So those are some aspects also that I've seen as part of my work and what I've noticed.
can you give us some additional examples, let's say, how you work with your clients or how you might work with some of the people listening tonight with business owners to facilitate communication and empathy and connection?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, there are a couple of ways through which we work with our clients.
Okay.
And one from an inclusive culture perspective, an inclusive leadership perspective, because sometimes people are just not aware. And so if we're able to coach them along, one, looking at where do the inequities lie across your company and organization, and sort of sit back and really identify, but really what that entails too is listening, doing more listening across the various groups. So it's not really identifying just one group to look at, but if it exists in one space, guess what? It's there across the spaces. So really creating that safe space for companies to have those courageous conversations, what I call them, where people can lay it on the line, but not feel as if they're going to have a negative repercussion towards what is being said, but it actually moving a conversation forward. So that's one way, just laying out, okay, let's have the conversation, find out what really is happening. But then two, how do we create more of an inclusive culture and what needs to go into place? And so really helping them to put together recommendations of next steps. And that might be like a laundry list of things, but how do we help you prioritize so that way you match your resources to what the business has and align that to the business strategy. So it's not this thing dangling over here and then you have revenues and other business needs, but how do we integrate best from a people perspective and business perspective so that way it's more aligned and moving in unison.
Right. I appreciate hearing those specific ways that you work with clients and businesses to achieve those objectives of communication, empathy, and connection in ways that would hopefully help them to see some of the implicit biases out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting because people often look at the world through their own perspective. If you ask an able-bodied person walking around New York City, hey, is this city, what's it like for disabled folks? Is it disability accessible? You think someone might say, well, I suppose so. I see a lot of disabled parking spots and I see restaurants with ramps. But if you spoke to a person who was in the disabled situation, some disabled person, they might say, how many places, for example, don't have an accessible bathroom?
Absolutely.
Something that you don't think about if you're
Absolutely.
not in that in that space.
But even think even more granular, even to your website. Is it ADA, approved
Right.
and accessible? And so if you don't think about even from that level of just the user experience, what else is missing across your organization? And if you don't have the people who are diverse representing those various parts of the community and aspects of which you serve, you miss a whole segment and insights that you could totally leverage, capitalize on, and even be more competitive as part of that mix.
I think it's a very important point, Simone. I think because people usually implement different measures and they hire people under two circumstances. One, they're afraid of being penalized, right? Punished for doing the wrong thing. Or two, they want to grow and have a benefit of some sorts, increase productivity, increase in profits or health of employees. And what's interesting is that the things that you do for your clients, teaching them about emotional intelligence and diversity and inclusion, things that I do for my clients, I believe, helping them comply with the labor and employment laws, it actually marries those two objectives in that they can avoid the bad stuff, the quote unquote bad stuff, avoid perhaps liability or avoid breakdowns in communication and conflict, and also, a happy employee is a more productive employee and a less stressed employee. So really glad that you kind of brought up those points. What I noticed too is that, and I think this is something for our viewers tonight to consider, with respect to why it might be important to really listen to Simone and maybe even give her a call for her services, is that in order to have truly diversity and inclusion, and we need connection, we need communication. And in this pandemic time, COVID-19, I think everyone being remote, or most people being remote and virtual and having meetings by telephone or not having certain social events together, I think what happens is that we just have fallen into much more, disconnected and at times isolated patterns, where it's like workers are doing their work and they check in with their boss and, everyone's working from different places. And I think it's hard for employers to actually see, they're not visibly witnessing the toll of the impact on their employees, right? They don't see the stress lines, the aggravation, the cracks that are happening. And I think it's so really great that you're encouraging your clients to have open communication. And open, I think, is so important. I think that we as business owners need to ask ourselves, what am I doing? How can I improve? And not just for myself, but for my employees and workers. Because without the workforce, without the workers behind us, as a business, what do we really have? I think that's so important. And, we actually have another commercial break. The time, it just flies. Doesn't it when you're having fun? It's really great.
Lots of fun.
I really am enjoying this conversation too. I hope
you.
our listeners are. So we'll be back shortly, folks, here on Employment Law Today on talkradio.nyc. Stick around with Simone Sloan. I'm Eric Sarver, your host and employment law business law attorney. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
You know you have it. The potential for a more rewarding life, a life that matters. But how do you get there? The answer is in a best-selling book by the coach of the successful and wealthy, Ken D. Foster, The Courage to Change Everything, Daily Strategies and Wisdom to Awaken Your Hidden Genius and Transform Your Life. With this powerful yet amazingly simple daily guide, your future is in your hands. You will be empowered to unlock your potential, bring out your true gifts, increase your wealth, and take your life and business to a new level. Get your life-transforming copy of Ken D. Foster's The Courage to Change Everything by going to couragetochange.us. That's couragetochange.us. Quite frankly, there's no other book like this. Imagine what your life could be like if you had at your fingertips the success principles to create the life you've always wanted. Are you ready to live your dream? Go to couragetochange.us.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today here on Talk Radio NYC. I'm your host, Eric Sarver. I'm here tonight with my special guest, friend and colleague, Ms. Simone Sloan, founder of Your Choice Coach, executive business coach, emotional intelligence coach, and diversity and inclusion consultant and specialist. So we've been talking tonight about some really powerful topics, including the impact of the pandemic on issues of disparate impact in the workplace, how the pandemic has created certain fault lines whereby companies' policies are disproportionately and adversely affecting women and people of color, and women of color for that matter as well. And I know, Simone, also we've been talking about some of the ways that you, through your services, help businesses out there and employers to recognize these implicit biases that are happening and to use methods such as open communication, dialogue, and creating a safe workspace to uncover and understand these implicit bias situations and then to work on them. If I'm not mistaken, is that sort of what you've been driving home?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nutshell, yes.
Can we talk for a minute about, we talked about the effect on women and we gave some specific examples. Can you give some specific examples in terms of what type of policies might impact, employing policies, I should say, might impact people of color in a more adverse way than their Caucasian counterparts?
In terms of policies that could impact and what I've seen, I think one of the key things is around taking time off, because when you look at it from the perspective of the rank, the status, and where they are within the organization, right? And if they are doing a double shift and they have children at home, being more flexible in terms of allowing them to have their work life balanced, kind of help them manage that, so that way they don't feel that they have to choose one thing over the other, right? From that perspective. But even when you think about it from the perspective of women in the workplace, we've been negatively impacted in terms of, pre-COVID, during COVID, right? Because if you think about layoffs and furloughs during COVID and who really gets impacted, and if you are a single parent responsible for your household, that drives a lot and causes even greater disparities across from an economic perspective, educational perspective, along different lines. And so thinking about what are other ways through which to gain more security around your financial status, so that way you can provide the basic needs during this time and not feel strapped to take care of your family, as well as be present and engaged in your role. Think too in terms of the hours of daycare that might be spent or not being spent. And if you are, and again, goes around the whole, really around the benefits pieces of what other resources and support can be provided to support people during this time, and especially women of color. It's mind-boggling. Think now, step back a bit and think if you were more senior within the organization and you are no longer visible as a senior member, a person of color, woman in those roles. That has a negative impact to the people who are in the lower echelons of the organization, because now there's like, well, I don't see me there. And what does that mean for my safety? What does that mean for our engagement and ability to move up across the organization? And that is a reality that we have to also consider. Think too in terms of not only that, but mentorship that gets lost, sponsorships that get lost, influencers who speak on your behalf when you're not in the room. Who's going to be there to support if you don't have advocates and allies across the organization supporting people of color? So those are some of the things, and from that gender perspective and the impact that can be negatively a repercussion across companies.
And I see it from the employment lawyer's hat perspective that I'm putting on my hat as an employment lawyer, how if you have disparate impact from certain policies that seem neutral on their face, but they affect people of color or women because of the fact that we know that certain resources are just inequitably distributed in a society. And as such, then it impacts women who may have to take care of their children, or who perhaps can't afford maybe a nanny, a pair that the executives in charge might have for their children. So they're saying, well, I'm working 65 hours a week. Why can't my employees work 50 hours a week? And it's, well, you can afford to hire this much assistance. You have a large 3-story house. This person is working out of a small apartment with three young children. So it's really interesting to look at that, because I've had clients over the years, even pre-COVID, where they came to me and I was reviewing their, say, the maternity leave policies or parental leave policies. And I had one client that was very happy with themselves. And I don't say that in a disparaging way, but I mean it as if they thought they were doing the right thing. They said, we're going to have a policy that says that everything in terms of certain promotions are based on metrics of how many hours you work, how many hours you bill, how many meetings you show up for, how many client meetings you make. And that, they said, is merit-based. And they said that for parents on leave, the leave does not, it's not offset, not taken into account in terms of how many hours they bill by the end of the year. And I said, well, wait a second, this is going to have an adverse impact on women who might be pregnant or have a child while in the workforce. And my then client said to me, new client, this was a potential client, I should say, potential client said to me, oh, no, it applies for men also. So if men take off for paternity leave, then they won't have their hours of time off for paternity leave counted against their billable hour rate in their meeting. So they said this is equal, right? It's, if a woman takes off for her child after giving birth, then she doesn't get to count those hours as credit, but we have the same policy for the men. But again, disparate impact discrimination looks at how does this come out right shake out in real life?
Right.
Does it have it? And if you can foresee a disparate impact, it's very foreseeable that some men might take off. I took off, I think, about 3.5 weeks. My son was born in early August 2019. So I was lucky. I'm self-employed. I can make it happen. It was the summertime. Took off about 3.5 weeks. My wife took off the full 13, almost 14 weeks. And a lot of women I know, a lot of men I know, I should say, might choose to take off just a few days, or might be pressured to do so by the corporate culture, right? But they have that choice, and a lot of women don't. I mean, from a very physical perspective of, you just gave birth to a human being, be able to travel to work or not and so I think it's just an example, and that comes up pre-COVID. And I think during COVID, we have employers now with work from home policies. What happens if your employees don't have the same resources, let's say, to a high-speed Wi-Fi connection? What if they don't have 5G at home? So I think it calls up on us all to, what I hear you say, I heard you mention earlier tonight was, hey, let's reassess how we as employers and business owners evaluate our employees during this pandemic, right? Let's not use the same perhaps metrics of productivity, and let's not pretend that, the pandemic is the same.
Absolutely. And you raise an interesting point too, because you think about it from the perspective of being at home and everything, family and work has been out integrated and blended. Mm-hmm. And if a woman, say, we're doing a Zoom call and maybe their children are in the background, you talk about implicit biases. Well, are they really that serious in the work? Are they committed? Are they really working while they're at home? And then think when you get down to the performance evaluations, those images come to mind and to bear, right? And not thinking about holistically of the human being in front of you and working for you or being part of your team, right? But just looking at that one narrow slither of what you experienced when you were engaging and interacting. And so that's another way through which you get slighted or marginalized as part of this process from that perspective.
It's interesting too, because I think a lot of employers might think they're doing their employees a favor by allowing them to work from home, or in some cases there's no choice because of different rules in effect during quarantine and so forth. But I think that when businesses have the option of work from home or not, and they choose to make it all remote, and they might be doing a good thing, but they might also have to recognize that even in the best of intentions, a policy or a practice can have a disproportionate impact, like the one you gave an example of. So that's a really great example, because I don't think people, when they, let's say a boss gives a performance review 3 months later, they may not be able to put their finger on why they think, let's say that, Janet is not, say, really committed to the team as much anymore, but maybe on their unconscious mind, they're forming a vision of Janet, on a Zoom call, but also trying to wrangle her kids in. Whereas, maybe Bob on the same Zoom call, maybe it was sort of, they fell into gender roles where his wife was, or partner may have been with the kids. So I think it really does bring into account that, again, the importance of businesses doing this. And I think, I would love to hear you perhaps talk about what benefits companies have. You mentioned before some, but if you can maybe elaborate more on, like, why is it beneficial for a company to be more diverse, to have diverse leadership?
Yeah.
Top.
Absolutely. Well, for one, when you think about it from the top, right, that's what drives it in terms of culture, in terms of commitment, and helping around the accountability with diversity. And if you have allies and advocates in those roles who are going to be able to push it down and bubble up, perfect. But 9 times out of 10, we don't see ourselves in those roles. And so that becomes another way through which, well, do they really value it or not? Are they really serious, or is this a check the box activity, right? Think too in terms of women in the leadership roles, because when you look at some of the data, you'll find that women are the ones who are championing diversity, talking more openly about it, mentoring others, and supporting that inclusive as well as diverse groups across the organization. And so when you're thinking about sponsorship, influencing, and as well as advocating for those who are not in the room, if we are in those roles, then they have a voice at the table, right? And so that becomes really important. Also in terms of diversity of thought and what does that really mean? Because as you know, from the data that we see from the next 20 to 30 years, there's not going to be a majority ethnic group, right, that exist. If you look at the Gen Zs, it's 50-50 right now in terms of non-Caucasian, Caucasian. Yeah. And so if you don't have the mindset of representing those groups and being able to speak more openly about them and to understand what they value, their purchasing decisions, what they think and do, and where do they show up and they populate and things of that nature, you're missing out on another subset of opportunities for your business as well as for your people to have impact.
Absolutely. I think what I hear there too, what I hear you saying is that without the people in leadership roles who can also have their finger on the pulse of meaning your business's clients, customers, product purchasers, et cetera, that it's sometimes I think what happens then is that the message, let's say in marketing and promotion from if maybe homogenous, non-diverse company, it falls flat, right? It can be tone deaf. You could have, right, the sort of the Pepsi commercial that, I think we all know, and shaking our heads, but perhaps clearly if there's maybe a little more diverse, people in that situation, one has to wonder, would that maybe have not been approved by somebody, who thought this was a great idea. So, we have to take another commercial break. Simone will be back. Folks, you're listening to or watching or both Employment Law Today. I'm here with my guest and friend, Simone Sloan, executive coach, diversity and inclusion specialist, and corporate coach. And we're here on talkradio.nyc. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sarver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver, employment law and business law attorney at the law offices of Eric M. Sarver. Here tonight, as I mentioned, with Simone Sloan of Your Choice Coach, executive coach, business coach, and diversity and inclusion specialist. And Simone, again, I really appreciate, as I mentioned in the chat box before, our topic today, our conversation. I think this is such an important thing for people to be aware of and mindful of. And, I think one thing that comes up in these situations when I talk to my clients about following the anti-discrimination laws and labor laws, and we talk about protected class status, there's a range of reactions. Some people are very empathetic and, to other people's plight, and some people, I think, come into it from a different point of view. I'm just wondering, have there been any, say, industries or fields that you've seen that there's a particular challenge that you find with when it comes to diversity and inclusion, maybe some roadblocks that they can't see or that you've been working with?
You mean tone deaf?
Perfectly described.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't want to call out industries, but I'll say this. The Wall Street Journal had actually a big spread on diversity, equity, inclusion that they put out back in January of 2019. And it looked across all industries, from healthcare, technology, financial services, you name it. Mm-hmm. And when it looked at it from a woman of color perspective, one thing that stood out for me is that when we speak, when we're at the table, right, the thoughts of whatever our ideas or insights are stated is forgotten instantaneously, and we're at the table. And can you imagine, right, if we're not even at the table and decisions are being made, management roles, in terms of promotions and bonuses and things of that nature. So that speaks volumes. And it wasn't across just one industry. Like I said, they looked at it a lot. And from that perspective. So I think that really when you're looking at it and people say, well, if it doesn't happen to me, it doesn't exist. And that might not be true.
Nope.
Right? Are we listening to what's really being said or what's not being said? And I think that's really the key thing, because you talked about psychological safety and being able to really have people express how they truly feel without any negative repercussions, right? So I would say this is look across, find out where the inequities lie, right, around that. And then look at it in terms of what are ways in which we can start fostering, or what foundational elements need to be in place to help foster more inclusion across businesses and organizations.
What are some of those foundational elements? I know you spoke about a few of them, but the communication, for example, any others that come to mind, our listeners tonight?
Sure. I think when we look at it, I like looking at structures to making things more sustainable. And when we talk about women, children bearing, especially in leadership roles and things of that nature, what foundational elements are needed for them? What resources can be provided to ensure that they thrive, they feel welcomed, valued, they can function and not have to choose life over work, even though we are in the work-life balance, supposedly, right? Also, flexibility. And how can we become more flexible? But it's important because people still need permission to be flexible in this current environment. And so what are ways through which to not only just say it, but show it? Because if you're a business owner or leader in these roles, show that what flexibility is, because what you're doing is giving permission for others to take that opportunity, right? And, you know, when you talk about from a gender bias perspective, get more aware in terms of what are there, what you think you don't know around it, because consciously or unconsciously, you know, they exist. And so really kind of dig deeper and really look across and start listening to what people are saying across the organizations, because they want to talk, they want to share. But if there's not a safe space for them to do that, you'll never hear those great insights.
I think that's so true. You know, being in employment law these years, I've handled a lot of matters for employees and employees over the course of my career. And I mean, these days, the majority of my clients are the employers and managers, the business owners, but I still have a handful of employees I represent in matters. And I've seen situations where an employer will come to me and say, you know, the company had a work retreat, as is of course pre-COVID, out for a weekend and a 3-day, and we were all out there together, and we had open dialogue, discussion groups, and some of the women got together and shared about their concerns about certain policies that they felt basically disparate discrimination, you know, disparate impact discrimination, that were basically affecting them in a negative way, and they wanted to see change. And I think the 3 women that raised the issue in this retreat, one was fired within 3 weeks for some ostensible issue that didn't seem to make sense. Another was up for promotion, did not get it. Another had such strife from her new boss that she ended up leaving. Came to me to negotiate some severance for her and so forth. But so here the company it's like they started out in the right foot, right? Oh, we're supposed to have an open dialogue. This is what everyone's telling us to do. That's what our HR people are telling us to do. So let's do it. But then you have to take in the feedback that you hear. And I think that, you know, I tell it to my clients a lot. I say, if you want to decrease employee conflict, or decrease the chance of perhaps litigation from an employee being let go who feels marginalized, disenfranchised, misunderstood, it's very important to actually listen and not respond or be reactive in a defensive, you know, way. Right. I think, you know, any of us who have been in business for ourselves can attest to the fact that, you know, taking in constructive criticism can be a little hard at times, right, for anyone. But honestly, it's one of the best tools I found in my career, in my life, you know, to improve on areas and move forward. So
absolutely. And
I think so. It's like, sounds like you give that permission to your clients and the space and encouragement to open themselves up to feedback from their employees, whether they be employees of people of color, whether they be women, with LGBTQIA employees,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And I think it's important because that's in terms of having a consultant or a neutral party, if you will, who has no attachment to how it goes, but it's really just there to deliver the message. And it gives people a sense of ease because it's not, oh, I'm John Doe saying X, Y's, and Z's. It's a collective group. And here are some of the themes that have been gleaned from various conversations that we've had. And it enables it also to have the leadership hear the message, right? And not focus on who said what and try to figure out the nuances around the insights. And that's why I think empathy becomes really important too, in terms of really, and you know, stepping into the shoes mental right now in terms of understanding if it's not happening to you, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? But how can you get more relatable to your people and really see what they see and what they're feeling? Because, you know, you don't want to do a check the box, oh yeah, I spoke to them, but what did you talk about? What was it meaningful? And what did they get out of it? Or were you just the one talking and ended the conversation and didn't do any listening whatsoever? So that's kind of really the key thing there during this time.
Wow. I think that's all really a great way to wrap it up and sort of encapsulate everything we've been discussing, you know, this evening. It's really something. It's, you know, I hear the points that people out there, business owners that are listening tonight, it's in your best interest to have a diversified workforce free of implicit bias, free of discrimination, free of aggression. And it's like people think they can't afford, let's say, to hire executive coach or a diversity and inclusion coach. It's almost like I think they really can't afford not to, much like I'm always talking about employee handbooks and stuff. We have about 2 minutes to wrap up the new show after us. So I just wanted to, before we get to Gateway to the Smokies with Joseph Franklin McElroy, I hope I said that correctly. Simone, in 2 minutes, can you give our guests, how would they contact you? What's your...
Sure. You definitely contact me on my website, yourchoicecoach.com. Please reach out, as also through LinkedIn, Simone Sloan.
And that's YOURCHOICE, right? Yourchoice.com.
Yourchoicecoach.com.
Coach, sorry, right? Yourchoicecoach.com. Okay. And Simone Sloan, you can see on LinkedIn. Yeah, I think it was a great conversation tonight. This is really an important theme, important topic. And I think that, I'm grateful that people like you are in the workforce doing this work. I tell you, it makes my job easier because I have clients now that are more proactive than reactive. They're able to nip discrimination in the bud. So at least if they follow, the advice that folks like you and I give to them.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Always, Simone, always a pleasure. Folks, you're here tonight. I'm Eric Sarver, the host of Employment Law Today, here on Talk Radio NYC. If you like what you heard, please tell your friends, tell your colleagues, and join us Tuesday nights, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. here on Talk Radio NYC. Thanks for listening. Happy New Year, 2021. Let's have a better year, God willing. And thank you, Simone, and to all, have a very good night.